Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and I wanted to talk about JoAnn fabrics today and what I think happened that were the mistakes they made that led to them closing. I wasn't going to make this like a month ago simply because everything up until they announced closing, everything felt in flux and like decisions hadn't yet been made whether or not it was going to stay open successfully or wind up closing. And now we know they're closing. And a lot of people seem to be shocked that this around about 90-year-old company is suddenly closing. And the point of fact is, I'm surprised it stayed open as long as it has. So there have been a lot of signs. As somebody who is not involved and has done minimal research, if you know what to look for in a company that's failing, you can usually predict that it is going to fail. And here's the big thing. Most of a company's history doesn't actually matter. Like what happened in 1936 or whatever year it opened does not have any bearing on the failings that JoAnn Fabrics had in the last 5 to 10 years, which is mostly what matters here. And I'm gonna go ahead and say it. I feel that a lot of what's going on with JoAnn Fabrics is not because of COVID, but I think COVID really brought out a lot of the issues that JoAnn Fabrics as a company has been having. Before COVID, you could tell they weren't doing great because they always seemed to be low staff. They always had a high volume of people in line, kind of no matter when you went in. And they didn't exactly have the cleanest stores. So one of the first signs I noticed in a store that's not doing well, it's not clean. They're not going to waste their time having excess help. So what I mean is physically clean, not spiritually clean. You'll usually find that in businesses that aren't doing very well, there's going to be a lot more dust and a lot more mess, and maybe the bathrooms may not be so trustworthy. A lot of companies actually hire cleaners to come in after hours and do a good cleaning job, either after store hours or before store hours. And this company will usually get the toilets and they'll vacuum and they might do some mopping. And this cleaning usually, if it's a healthy company, this cleaning happens every day. When I worked over at Barnes & Noble, our location had a company that came in 4 days a week. 3 days a week, we had to do our own cleaning. And somehow it always worked that I was opening the book floor on a Sunday, which was the day I had to clean the bathrooms, and we never had the proper equipment to do that well. That location is now closed. Am I surprised? No. And JoAnn's has been getting progressively dirtier and dirtier. And a lot of this comes from one of two things. One usually happens first, then the other one. First, they usually fire the cleaning company. Usually that marks a big decline in cleanliness of the store. And then they're not hiring enough staff or keeping enough staff on hand to actually do all of the side work. Let's take JoAnn Fabrics, for example. A lot of people see like the people who are the cashiers and maybe the person who is working in the fabric department who do the cutting and stuff. But there's also people who stock the store. There's people who work in the back simply doing intake and stock management. You also need to have an extra person on hand to cover breaks. And that's the big thing that you can usually tell, that they're not getting that extra person to cover breaks, because they'll have like 2 people at the cash register at all times. And these 2 people are not only doing cash register stuff, they're also like helping people get their online orders. So they're doing more. And then when it's time for one of them to go on breaks, they just close that one instead of somebody coming over to take over for them. And then maybe having 3 people help for a little while and then the next person can go on break. It's not covering the time that a person needs off, because friendly reminder, in the state of California, if you're working an 8-hour shift, At the 3-hour mark, you're supposed to have a 15-minute break. At the 5-hour mark, you're supposed to have a 30-minute lunch. And usually around the 6.5 to 7-hour mark, you have your last 15-minute break. I mean, that's the absolute latest that break time has to happen. So the minute you go past 3 hours, you need to have a 15-minute break, whether your relief has arrived or not, because otherwise the store is in violation of state law. You can tell when they're not having that extra person come on, or they're understaffed. They have one person doing the work of 2, 3, 4, whatever, which happens more and more as they're struggling more and more to make ends meet. This happened when I worked at Barnes & Noble. I was supposed to work in the cafe. That was my job, was as one of the cafe employees. I did cross-train into the bookstore, but they were having the same problems there. The cafe was supposed to be staffed by 4 people, 3 at minimum, 4 for the busy times to keep up with a lot of the back end stuff like cleaning dishes and baking and stuff. There's supposed to be 1 person taking orders, 1 person doing the cash register, and 1 person doing the espresso bar. And that person taking the orders would fulfill the food orders, and they'd sometimes help the person on the espresso bar doing like the frozen drinks and stuff. More often than not, I would open by myself, and the first 2 to 3 hours of my shift, I would be completely on my own. So 1 person doing the job of 3 to 4 people, until it was about time for my first break to happen, and then they'd have a second staff member come on for the mid-shift shift. And then they'd cover like my break and then my lunch and maybe my second break, and they'd have their break in that time too, so I'd cover for them. And then when I went off, somebody else came on, so there'd just be like no overlap technically. It was the funniest thing. We had to go over to the children's department to clock in and out, because that's the only computer we were supposed to do that from. And so I always had to wait for the person to come to me, and then I'd have to go across the bookstore to the kids department to clock out. And then they always wondered why it took 5 to 15 minutes for a shift change to happen. Like between people sometimes arriving late and actually having to wait for somebody to clock in, come over, update them, and then go over to leave. Yeah, it took 5 to 10 minutes to do that. Should have just scheduled a 15-minute overlap and been fine. And that's another thing that's not happening. They're not allowing that kind of overlap, because having 1 person leave at 3 and the next person come on at 3 makes sense on paper. In practicality, when you have to update them on what's going on in the store, you need an overlap. At the very least, you wouldn't be surprised at the extra 8 hours of payroll you have to pay every pay period, because you're not factoring that overlap. Anyway, getting back on topic, another thing that was really shoddy was JoAnn Fabric's online ordering, which was not their biggest source of income pre-COVID. And you can tell they basically had online stuff just because it was kind of expected in this day and age. And they did have an app where you could get the coupons and everything. And that worked fine before COVID and really exploded during COVID. And this was one of their weakest systems that was in place, because they did not have a cohesive system. They had a separate system for the app and online sales. Their website was hosted completely separately, not at all in conjunction with the app. Separate companies were handling them, separate companies were managing them, and the companies and the store didn't really talk to each other. And as a result of this, it's just became a mess doing online ordering. On top of the fact that the systems just didn't talk to each other. So, the inventory would say that you had 3 balls of a particular yarn on the website, but they would not say they had those 3 balls. They would be sold out on the app. And that's because they're not talking to each other. And so you could order online and then get a notification that they couldn't fulfill that part of your order because they were actually out. Stock management was just down. And I'm going to talk more about this later as things kind of got worse. But a big portion of that is when multiple ordering systems are not talking to each other, that's when you're more likely to oversell what you have. It also means that it makes figuring out what to order for managing stock levels are harder because you have to look in several different places. Not to mention ordering online for shipment, ordering online to pick up in the store, and then going into the store, you're picking up product from the same places. So most of us assume that when you're ordering online for somebody shipping your order to you, you assume it's going to be at their local warehouse, relatively local warehouse, the closest warehouse to you. So like the California Central Warehouse or something like that. You basically expect to get your order from the place that is giving the JoAnn stores their stuff. At the very least, you'd expect something like that. Or maybe a separate warehouse where they do ship to home orders. That's not what they did. Everything operated out of the local store. So if you wanted to purchase, say, DMC embroidery floss online, it was coming from the same store as if you were going to pick it up in store, or it would be just on the shelf. A lot of them tried to have as much of their product as possible on the shelf. So if a customer in the store picked up, say, all of the DMC 310 because they're doing a big order and needed a lot of black, the person fulfilling the order for ship to home would go there and see the tray has no black because it wasn't a separate set of stock for online. You see the problem, right? I don't know if I'm explaining this well. They can't guarantee online stock because random customers are coming in on a whim and buying up their stock. And with the separate systems, things don't always update in a timely fashion. So, I have a puppy right here. I'm giving her a pet. I made my emotional support puppy, right? And despite this, despite the fact that it'd be your local store fulfilling your order, shipping was outrageous. Like, if you wanted to buy floss online at JoAnn Fabrics, you had to buy at minimum 2 skeins. So if you're purchasing for a large order, say I had one that I wanted that had 86 different colors that I needed to purchase. I did already have some, but I still needed like 86 different colors. So I needed 86 single skeins. I would have had to purchase 2 of each color to have it shipped to me. And I would have had to pay over $10 in shipping. At 66 cents a skein, hank, whatever you want to call the little things of thread, all of a sudden, instead of paying about $50 or $60 on thread, all of a sudden I'm paying an additional $10, kind of regardless, and it'd go up the bigger your order was. Not to mention, at least ordering through the app, you could only order a maximum of 50 different items. If you needed 86, it would just start throwing fits at you of item out of stock, item out of stock, item out of stock, or not available at this store. Instead of saying you hit the max that you could order, it would just start throwing up problems. So I'm gonna give you a hint. I had switched to 123stitch.com. They have this wonderful auto add feature. So instead of having to do a search for the color, click into the thing, double check that it actually took you to the correct color, because if it was out of stock, it wouldn't tell you out of stock on that color. It would just send you to a different color that usually had no relation to the color you needed. And then clicking on the 1 or 2 or whatever it is you wanted. And then having to go back to the search to do the next color, 123stitch.com, you have this auto add. All you need to do is like put a space between each number, and you can click if you want 1 of each, 2 of each, 3 of each, so on and so forth. So if you have mostly single hanks that you need, you know, just 1 of each color, you just put 1, and then if there's 1 you need 2, you just put it on twice. And at the end you get everything on there. You hit add, and then it winds up all in your cart correct. The one item you needed 2 of lists it as 2. It's a smart system because they're entirely online. None of this difficulty with the app bullshit, and no minimum purchase requirements. Not to mention 123stitch would fulfill it in the same day, and flat rate shipping. Because even with 100 skeins, it comes in this little bag that's like flat and only like this big. It doesn't require $10. And not gonna lie, 123stitch's headquarters is farther away than my local JoAnn fabric stores. I had like 2 of them that are relatively close, and another one in, you know, less than an hour away. I have options. There's no reason that it needed to be that complicated, that bad communication, and just that expensive. And the thing is, I know what they're doing. They're trying to get their existing workforce to do extra work for the same price. They're trying not to have to add an extra facility with extra workers to make this actually go smoother. And that's where the problem really ultimately broke down for them, because they had too few people trying to do too many different kinds of tasks. The people couldn't do it. So in the end, you know, we could really tell the last few years that things really weren't going well, because so often we would go into stores and just see entire rows of shelves out of stock of stuff. They were having so few people on staff, they couldn't stock the shelves. It wasn't even a matter of them procuring items. It was a matter of them getting them on the shelf to give to the customers. And that's because I'm gonna tell all you business people the big secret to success. Hire enough staff. It's the big secret to everything. Now, you don't want to overhire staff. Like, if you can do your own marketing for small businesses, do your own marketing. That's fine. But if you need help, get the help. If your staff is happy and they're doing a good amount of work for a good amount of pay, and they feel respected and appreciated, they're going to pass on their happiness to the customer and create excellent customer shopping experiences. And that is going to create word of mouth advertisement, or word of mouth promotion, because that person's going to start bringing family and friends to the store. That person's going to say, oh, I had this wonderful experience over at this place. And the minute that a business stops respecting its employees is when it turns. For example, when I worked at Barnes & Noble, I was there for 2 years. I was hired in November of 2013, and as a seasonal worker, I stayed on as a permanent employee, and I wound up getting pushed out in January of 2016, which was fine. I already had another job lined up, and I was pretty much out. That first year was really good. I was treated well. I was cross-trained into the bookstore. I had enough shifts. And although we were a bit low staffed at quieter times, it was never unmanageable because I could always get the help that I needed. From November 2014, when the cafe manager quit, through to when I got pushed out, which was mid-January 2016, so a period of about 14 months, a store that normally has a turnover rate of about 3 or 4 people a year had 17 people either change locations or quit. 3 to 4 is normal. 17 people. That's a sign that there's a problem. That's not necessarily something that a customer is necessarily going to see unless they are there all the time and really get to know the staff. But there is such a cultural change with that many people leaving. There is so much disgruntlement that happens there. And there were a lot of things that were going on. We're not talking about Barnes and Noble, but that is also a sign that there are problems when that many people are leaving voluntarily, and some not so voluntarily. I mean, I look back, I got pushed out, and you know what I should have done? I'm just gonna say this. If somebody asks you to resign, don't resign, make them fire you. Yes, you do have to explain why you got fired, but you'll be entitled to unemployment if you don't have something already lined up. And if it is for a bad cause, you have grounds for an unlawful termination suit. Just saying, don't quit. I was going to quit anyway. I was getting 4.5 hours per week, which didn't even cover the gas it cost me to get there and home again. A lot of that stuff I saw with my Barnes & Noble store, I see at JoAnn Fabrics. And now that they've just kind of given up the ghost, the liquidation company has purchased them and they are officially going out of business, it's like, I'm not surprised. I haven't had a genuinely good experience at a JoAnn Fabrics since 2018. And there are so many better online stores. Like Michael's, I don't think is really any better, though they seem to be doing better right now, and they're probably getting a lot more business with JoAnn locations closing. Same for Hobby Lobby. But just shopping online has become so much easier if you know where to go. Like I do cross stitch and knitting and crochet. So for cross stitch and embroidery stuff, I go to 123stitch.com. I'm not sponsored, I just highly recommend them. They're awesome. And for yarn, I tend to go to Knit Picks because they have pretty decent prices for natural fibers, which JoAnn Fabrics really didn't have. And their acrylics also really good and less expensive. So that's what I do. I very rarely go to stores to shop unless it's my LYS. I don't have an LNS. An LNS is local needlepoint shop and LYS is local yarn shop. I have 2 local yarn shops. I have videos posted on this channel of me going to a couple of them. And I haven't stepped foot in a JoAnn Fabrics except with my mom in years. And I'll be honest, I haven't even ordered from JoAnn Fabrics. I think I've ordered from them like twice in the last year. And for somebody who crafts as much as I do, that is very low. So, am I surprised they're going out? No. I honestly expect in a few years' time, Michael's probably going to go the same way. Just a rough guess. I give them 5 years before they get in dire straits and maybe 10 years before they actually kick the bucket. My guess. I don't think this was helpful, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna go get some coffee to hopefully feel better about myself. And I think I'm gonna go get some ice cream to feel better about this whole situation, because it is sad to see something that's been a real rock in the knitting crafting community for such a long time. But happy crafting. Bye.